What if death was not the end? What if someone, thousands of years ago, had written a complete manual for crossing into the afterlife? Not a book of comfort, not a symbolic text, but precise instructions. Words that should never be spoken out loud. Spells that only work if the heart is pure. Formulas that decide whether a soul will continue to exist. The ancient Egyptians believed that without this knowledge, no spirit would survive the final judgment. They called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. We know it as the Book of the Dead. But the real question is, was this book created to guide the dead, or to warn the living? Long before modern religions spoke of heaven or hell, ancient Egypt was already describing, in disturbing detail, what happens after the final breath. For them, death was not disappearance. It was the beginning of a long, dangerous journey filled with judgment. The Egyptian universe was governed by a sacred order called Mat, the cosmic balance that sustained the world, the gods, and humanity. And after death, every soul had to prove it had lived in harmony with that order. It is within this context that the Book of the Dead emerges. But here is an essential detail. It was never a single book. What we now call the Book of the Dead was actually a collection of spells, prayers, and magical formulas written over more than 1,000 years. Each version was unique. Each papyrus was customized for the dead who would carry it. Some were simple, others were extremely complex, filled with illustrations, symbols, and scenes from the beyond. These texts were placed inside tombs, among linen wrappings, amulets, and the mummified body, not for decoration, but for use. Because, according to the Egyptians, the afterlife did not forgive ignorance. The moment a person died, their soul did not rest. It fragmented the Ka, the life force, the Ba, the personality that could travel, and the Ak, the transformed spirit, which would only exist if everything went right. These parts had to reunite in the afterlife, and the path to get there was anything but safe. The first challenge was crossing the Duat, the realm of the dead, a place that looked nothing like a paradise, more like a labyrinth of rivers of fire, magical gates, hybrid creatures, and entities that fed on lost souls. Each gate had a guardian. Each guardian demanded something specific, not gold, not strength, knowledge, the correct name, the exact word, a spell spoken without error, and this is where the Book of the Dead became vital. Without it, the soul was trapped. It wandered, or it was destroyed. In many spells, the dead had to declare phrases such as, "I know you. I know your names. I know what you guard." In ancient Egypt, to know the name of something was to have power over it. But the true terror of the journey was still to come. The weighing of the heart at the center of the Duat awaited the most feared moment of all. The judgment. The soul was led before Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. Beside him, 42 divine judges watched in silence. Then, the heart of the dead was removed. Not symbolically, but spiritually. It was placed on a sacred scale and weighed against the feather of Mat, the symbol of truth and justice. If the heart was heavier than the feather, it meant guilt, lies, betrayal, imbalance, and the sentence was immediate. The creature, known as Ammit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, devoured the heart. There was no hell, no eternal punishment. There was something worse, absolute erasure from existence. But the Book of the Dead offered one last chance. Spells to deceive death. Among its most famous spells is one known as Spell 125. In it, the dead recite the so-called negative confession, an impressive list of declarations such as, "I did not kill, I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not cause suffering." But here is the disturbing detail. This was not a spontaneous confession. It was memorized, a formula, which means the judgment did not analyze actions alone, but the ability to declare innocence correctly. Some scholars believe the Book of the Dead was not only spiritual, but also magical and legal, as if the soul stood before a cosmic court where perfectly spoken words could alter the final verdict. And perhaps that is why the Egyptians feared dying without this book. Amulets, symbols, and protection. The Book of the Dead never came alone. It was accompanied by specific amulets. The heart scarab, for example, was placed on the mummy's chest to prevent the heart from betraying its owner during judgment. There was also the Eye of Horus, a symbol of protection and regeneration. Each object had a corresponding spell in the book. Each symbol was a key. Nothing was random. Death, for the Egyptians, was precise spiritual engineering. One mistake, and everything was lost. A forbidden book. As centuries passed, the Book of the Dead ceased to be exclusive to pharaohs and began to be used by scribes, priests, and even common citizens. But it never lost its aura of danger. For a long time, these texts remained sealed inside tombs. When archaeologists finally began translating them, they noticed something unsettling. Many spells were not prayers, but direct instructions. Some claimed certain passages should never be read outside ritual context. Others believe the book describes a cosmology so detailed that it may not have been purely symbolic. And then the question that still echoes today arises. There is a detail in the Book of the Dead that rarely appears in modern adaptations. Something not highlighted in museums, nor in conventional documentaries. The Egyptians did not believe that everyone deserved to survive after death. The afterlife was not a right, it was a privilege. In several spells, the text is clear. Only those who know can cross the Duat. Ignorance is not punished, it is simply erased. And this is where the Book of the Dead reveals its most disturbing face. It was not written to save everyone. It was written to select. Each word functioned as a test. Each symbol, a filter. Those who did not know the correct names of the gods, those who misspoke a formula, those who confused one gate for another, were consumed by the path itself. Some texts describe souls wandering in circles, unable to move forward or return. Others speak of spirits dissolving within the Duat, losing form, memory, and identity. There are no screams, no prolonged judgment, only oblivion. And then comes an even more unsettling revelation. The book that works on both sides. Some Egyptologists believe the Book of the Dead was not meant only for the dead. It was also training for the living. Priests read and copied the spells throughout their lives. They learned the secret names of the gods. They memorized the maps of the Duat. To die unprepared was a serious failure. To live without studying the afterlife was a risk. In other words, the Book of the Dead taught people how to live as if they were already being watched by the final judgment. Every action, every lie, every injustice weighed on the heart long before death. And perhaps that is why the Egyptians feared an unbalanced life more than death itself. The final question at the end of some papyri. There are phrases that do not sound like blessings. They sound like warnings. The text says the true danger is not the monsters of the Duat, not Ammit, not the judges. The greatest danger is believing the path will forgive you, because the Book of the Dead does not forgive, it demands. And perhaps, deep down, this is the message that crossed millennia. Death does not test who you were, it reveals who you truly are. Today, fragments of the Book of the Dead rest behind glass in museums around the world, disconnected from their rituals, separated from their dead. But the words remain, spells written to be spoken, names created to be called, maps of a place that, according to the Egyptians, we will all one day visit. They believed forgetting was the worst death of all. Perhaps that is why they wrote so much. Perhaps that is why they left such precise instructions. Not to defy death, but to avoid disappearing within it. And maybe, just maybe, the Book of the Dead was never about dying, but about how to avoid being erased from existence. If you had only one book to cross the afterlife, would you know how to use it? If this mystery made you question what lies beyond the final breath, leave a like. Subscribe to Urban Secrets to keep exploring legends, forbidden texts, and secrets history tried to bury. And tell us in the comments, do you believe the Book of the Dead was symbolic, or a true manual for the beyond? Because some questions don't wait for death to be answered.